Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, I'm joined by two special guests, Jim and Mai from the Spanish and Go podcast. They have 150,000 subscribers on YouTube. They've had a podcast for a couple of years now. They teach people Spanish basically, and I personally love their podcast, so happy to welcome them on the show.
Thanks for having us, Vance.
Hola.
How's it going, guys?
Doing well. We're hanging out here in Nicaragua for
Hmm.
about a month, and the weather's great. Can't complain.
That's awesome. Is it like rainy season now, or?
The rainy season is just starting, so it's pretty humid.
It's been really hot here, and we're taking care of two dogs. Maybe you can hear one barking.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's always good to have like birds chirping, monkeys, all that on the podcast.
Well, this is Latin America, right?
Exactly. And I'll start off the episode by giving a big shout out and congratulations and thank you to you guys because I love the Spanish and Go podcast, and what I really love is that exactly that type of format that you guys do, sort of that 20 to 30 minute educational Spanish podcast where it's in Spanish but sort of slow and easy to understand, and I actually attribute a lot of my growth in my fluency and Spanish skills to podcasts in that exact format, that like 20 minute whatever that I listen to at the gym. It's awesome.
We're happy to hear that. Thanks, man. That's great. That's fantastic. That was a tool that really helped me when I was starting out learning Spanish too. And I continue to listen to podcasts in Spanish because it really pushes your comprehension skills, right? So it's a useful tool to kind of figure out different words, different phrases in context. And if you're missing something, you can usually kind of bridge the gap just based on what people are talking about. So we think it's one of the best ways to learn a language for sure.
And I feel like it's still early, and there's just sort of a small community of, maybe you probably know more than I do, but like 5 to 10 of these podcasts. There's Noitos, that I know you guys have collaborated with. I love Noitos.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
There's Spanish Land School, which I really
Mm-hmm.
like.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Unlimited Spanish. Yeah, who else would you recommend people check out?
Yeah, I had never heard that last one you mentioned, but we have collaborated with Spanish Land, also with
And
Mextalkie.
yep, Max Talkie, Anai David from How to Spanish podcast. They're
Yes.
great.
And of course, Ben and Marina from Notes in Spanish,
Oh
which
yeah,
was like our inspiration, right?
yeah, they're the OG Spanish or teaching Spanish podcasters. I think they had the very first Spanish podcast for students of Spanish, basically.
Right, that was the OG. That there was that, and there was News and Slow Spanish, and maybe
Uh-huh.
like one other OG one. And Maria, was that they were a couple too?
Yeah, yep. Ben and
Marina.
Marina
Hmm.
are a couple. Yep. And then I think right after them, we're talking to Benny Marina about this. They were saying they were first, but then it was it News and Slow Spanish? No, I don't want to get it wrong. There was another podcast that came right after them that taught Spanish, but they were first. So Notes in Spanish was number one.
Well, I'm glad you guys, have been passed the torch, and we actually kind of first connected. One, because I really like Noitos. I need to make a note to reach out to those guys. I also just want to give people a bit more background about your guys' whole presence and everything. And one thing I noticed is that you actually started Jim, like the YouTube channel, quite early on, like 4 or 5 years ago, kind of putting up some vlogs and travel videos and stuff. And it seemed like when you started, it almost wasn't even 100% about like teaching Spanish. Or I'm sort of curious how it evolved because, long story short, you had a YouTube channel way before the podcast. And so,
Mhm.
over the years, I guess you've kind of tried different things.
Yeah, it is a long story. In fact, it goes back even farther because we started off with a podcast that we never actually even published. So,
In 2011,
yeah, I
10.
think I think so. No, 11 or 12, I think.
Mm-hmm.
2011, 2012. But yeah, basically, uh, I'm from Rochester, Minnesota. I'm a recording studio engineer, music producer. That's what I did before I ever met Mai. I wanted to learn Spanish in about 2009, 2010 ish. And I started down that path because I wanted to travel more. And not too far into my journey learning Spanish, I met Mai through italki, and she's a teacher and has always been a teacher. And we eventually decided to meet up in Mexico after talking for about 6 months on that platform. And it was then when we really hit it off. We fell in love. She was taking me around Mexico, and we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could combine forces, combine what she does best, teach, with what I do best, and that's recording and production, and see if we can make an online business out of that, to be guides for people who want to explore Spanish speaking countries. Also, maybe you want to learn Spanish, maybe you want to live in another Spanish speaking country, understand more about the culture, not just go down the normal route of just staying at a all inclusive resort and not really seeing much of the actual country. So we wanted to be that for people. And so I was following a bunch of bloggers at the time. We met up with some of them in Mexico. That really inspired us because we saw people were actually doing it. And this was, before many people even worked all online. These guys were just traveling all over the place,
Hmm.
making a professional income. We decided we should do something like that. So we weren't sure if we wanted to do a blog or a podcast or a YouTube channel, but uh,
We
we
started with the
we
podcast.
started with the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember that that's when Jim was like in an intermediate Spanish level. He was able to have some very basic conversations. So I feel like at first he was a little bit shy of like publishing what we were recording because he was making a lot of mistakes and he's always been very like, oh, I want to get it right,
Yeah.
a perfectionist.
Yeah.
But I don't know why we ended up not publishing those episodes we recorded. But then we went to a few conferences, like travel conferences and online businesses conferences, and everyone was talking about YouTube and how YouTube and videos was like the next thing. And so that's when we decided, okay, well, let's give this a go. Let's open up a YouTube channel. And yeah, it was, I think, in 2016.
Yep. That's when we
Uh,
started the channel.
and at first, honestly, I feel like we didn't know exactly what we were doing, but we wanted to do something, right? Like we had this idea of we want to travel, we want to visit every Spanish speaking country in the world, and we want to create content. And like Jim mentioned at the beginning, we wanted to be like the person holding your hand when you are immersing yourself in a new culture and showing you around or showing people how to interact with the locals for the first time. And so that's how the YouTube channel started.
Yeah. And then
Hmm.
it just kind of developed from there.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I kind of noticed that the YouTube channel and the podcast, they're not just carbon copies of each other, and you've actually really adapted your content on YouTube to be more YouTube centric. For example, my speaking of the helping hand, the video would be like how to get to Playa del Carmen, take the bus from the airport.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So you have like some more practical content like that,
Hmm.
stuff around immigration, things like that. So and then but the podcast has much more of like a like learn Spanish, we are
Right.
teachers like type of vibe.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's the goal. After we, when we decided that we wanted to have a YouTube channel, we started doing like travel vlogs, but then nobody was watching those, right? Like I don't like to go back to like those first videos we did because it's like, oh, it's cringy.
I think everybody cringes at their first videos that they
Yeah.
publish, right?
Yeah, but we honestly, like, we didn't know exactly what we were doing. And we were just experimenting with what Spanish and Go was going to be until we noticed that there was a specific type of content that people were really in need for, like the how to in Spanish videos, right? Like how
Hmm.
to order a meal in Spanish,
How
you
to
know,
ask for directions, how to
how
make small talk,
yeah,
how to
how to
order.
order a coffee at a coffee shop in Spanish. All these little things that help you a lot when you're traveling. We actually have met people like on the streets, and they stop us and they're like, "Oh, I have the list of like the phrases you used on that video, and I use them every time I go to a restaurant, and it's so cool."
Yeah.
And so that's when we decided, okay, the YouTube channel is going to be this. And then later on, when we decided that we wanted to continue with the podcast idea, we didn't want it to be the exact same thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I kind of look at the YouTube channel as being more towards people who are curious about Spanish speaking countries or maybe interested in learning Spanish, but haven't quite started or they're at the beginning stages.
Mhm.
And the podcast is more so for the people who have gotten a little bit of a start, who are maybe advanced beginners, intermediates, and want to take their Spanish to the next level.
Yeah, do you have a sense for like how good someone's Spanish is that's listening to a podcast that's, 95% in Spanish? Because I remember I used to listen when I would understand like 10, 20%. And then now it's like a whole different story where I'm still listening, but it's like, 90% comprehension, but I'm still listening.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like we get a variety. We notice from the people who join us for our immersion retreats, we actually every time we have one, we have to divide it in like levels. So we do 1 week for the beginner intermediate level, and then week two is for like the intermediate advanced students, and we get all kinds of levels, right? Like I feel like people start listening whenever they feel like they're ready to immerse themselves in content like that. And some people are afraid of listening to full on Spanish conversations because they think, oh, I'm not going to understand everything. Why even listen? But you have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah. And your level in Spanish, it's a tricky thing to figure out because you can be someone who hardly ever practices speaking, but you can get to a level where you understand practically everything. And so we even have people at that stage who join us on our retreats, and that's when we're really able to talk to our students and get a feel for where they're at. And that comes up often where they're listening to the podcast and they understand basically everything, but they aren't quite at that point where their speaking is fluent or they're comfortable talking to other people, or maybe they pause a lot when they're thinking or have trouble getting through expressing how they feel. So that's normal. I mean, writing is one skill in Spanish, speaking is another, and listening is another, and so you have to practice all of them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And let's actually talk about like those four pillars: reading, writing, speaking, and listening.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yep.
So we have four pillars, but I would argue that they're not all equally as important. Would you agree with that?
Well, it depends on what your goals are, right?
Right.
If your goal is to visit a Spanish speaking country, you probably don't have to focus nearly as much on writing or reading.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking and listening, in that case, are the most important things.
Right.
To me, I mean, that was my motivation. But then you'll run into people who they're most interested in reading Spanish literature. And
Mm-hmm.
for them, they can get really far with their reading and maybe are pretty good with their writing as well, but not so much with their speaking or their listening skills. So I think they are important to different levels depending on each student's motivation. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I would say.
Hmm. Well, I'll hit you guys with a theory just for fun. So I would argue that listening is by far the most important skill, probably more important than the other three combined.
I agree.
And let's like just take one scenario, which would be, let's just say, Jim, that you understood Chinese perfectly when people speak it. You knew everything that they were saying, but you could only respond like yes and no and shake your head.
Hmm.
And you couldn't write it
Hmm.
or read it, but you could understand everything people were saying, like at the whatever Chinese restaurant.
Okay.
Like, I would argue that that person is fluent in the language because you'd for sure be able to communicate if you can listen. So I would call that person fully fluent. And I don't know, I just feel like it's the most powerful too. You know, speaks to having a podcast.
Yeah, we actually made a podcast episode about this. I think it was called like the most important skill you should have for for your Spanish, and it was actually that one, listening. I agree. I agree that listening is, or understanding. Yeah, yeah, understanding the language is by far more important than being able to write it, right? But it's because we are in touch with people who want to travel. So like Jim said, it depends on the student's motivation.
But yeah, language starts from communicating with one another. It doesn't
Hmm.
start with writing, right?
Hmm.
Unless it's just a made up language. Like, I don't know, what's the language that they came up
Esperanto.
with for Lord of the Rings, right? Like the
Oh.
author just made that language up. But language develops because of communication between people. So
Hmm.
the reading and writing aspect is always secondary,
Hmm.
considering that language evolves through communication with one another, usually through speech, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I get what you're saying about the fluency by understanding, because it is extremely important to be able to understand people in another language. That's a good judge of kind of where someone's at with their language learning journey, for sure. But I often think about the word in Spanish for fluency, right? Si eres fluido, right?
Fluido, yeah.
Fluido.
Hmm.
That's fluid. And that makes me think, oh, like a faucet, right?
Hmm.
If you're fluent, if you're fluido, you're like a faucet where the water's just coming out, right?
Yeah.
It's not dripping, it's
Hmm.
just flowing out.
Yeah.
And if you can do that when you're conversing with someone, that to me is real fluency. If you're not stopping too much, you're not just like dripping or the water just dries up completely for a little while and then starts again. To me, that's like the fluency, the fluidez.
Yeah, being able to express yourself. I think that's, for me, that's what fluency is. It can be either will with gestures, but mostly with words. Yeah, being able to put your ideas into actual sentences. That's for me fluency.
Yeah, that's really useful. I encourage everybody who is learning a language to start listening to real conversations as quickly as possible, because I think we fool ourselves when we're adults. Most people get the idea that we have to start with the Spanish 101 book and we have to figure out all the grammar first. And while that can help structure the language in your mind, we are built to communicate with one another. You know, a huge part of our brains is for communication, and practically no one ever makes the comparison that when you learn your first language, you're not thinking about the grammar, you're not reading English 101 books if English is your first language to get to the point where you're fluent in the language. You're mostly listening, sometimes speaking, copying the things that you hear. And we tend to forget about that when we're adults. We think that somehow we've changed once we've learned our first language and a decade or two goes by and we want to learn another. It's like, of course, learning this using the same method we use to learn our first language is going to work for a second language.
Hmm. And I'll pay you another compliment, which is that I really do think that the podcasts that are basically all in Spanish are superior compared to, say, there's the Duolingo Spanish podcast that's literally like 60% English and I'm like, why? Or
Yeah.
there's and yeah, some of them would just be like like have like way too much English, and I'd be like, no, just all I need. And so there are actually other podcasts that, as you know, my Spanish level has grown. I just don't listen to them anymore because it's just there's just too much English.
Yeah.
So that kind of happened with the Duolingo ones, some other ones. But if it's like all 100% in Spanish, I can continue listening to that at any skill level. So it kind of like allows you to like retain that fan or customer longer.
Sure. And I think it kind of depends on who's listening too, right? Because some people get really frustrated if they don't understand something right away. And maybe for those types of people, it can be useful to have some English. But if you really want to push yourself to understand the language, the more you listen to it, the better, for sure. And I think the less hand holding that you have, the better off you'll be in the long run.
Hmm. I had another thought related to your content that I like, which was, Mai was talking about how you would make, uh, those kind of really common question videos like Sid versus Estar, or, like how do you say realize? Like, is it realizar? Is it darse cuenta?
Uh
You know what I
huh.
mean? And all those type of like little grammar videos and things like that. And, I'd be curious what your experience has been, but I know with kind of videos like that that they don't really pop. Like it's something that the algorithm can't really show to every like a broad audience. But like I think it really has a good long tail because there's gonna be a couple people every day like searching that
Mhm.
on Google. And YouTube videos pop up on Google now, and of course YouTube search. And I think there's just like enough like long tail SEO traffic to sort of get you going from a, build a brand perspective. And then, you just sort of build like a low, so it's sort of like a slower cycle, but it's actually has a lot of longevity because you're not, reliant on videos going viral or popping. You're just like
Mhm.
really cranking out these things that people are going to be searching.
Right. Well, when we started the channel, like I said, we weren't sure exactly what we were doing, but then we realized after going to a couple of conferences, I mean, for the most part, people don't care who you are unless you can help them in some way.
Yeah.
So if you can start helping people answer their questions, be somewhat entertaining, try to give the best answer you possibly can for common questions that come up, things that people search for, then you start to build that relationship because then it's like, oh, I know Jim and Mai, or I know Vance. They've helped me on a number of occasions because anytime I'm looking for this sort of content, they've got an answer for me. And once we realized that, then we thought, okay, well, yeah, it makes perfect sense to build up a library of lots of evergreen content so that we could kind of bring people into our community and they could see, okay, well, we've got more than just that as well.
Yeah, I think the evergreen is key.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Especially with blogs now. I mean, we're not heavy on the blog these days. We've tried to convert a lot of our YouTube content to blog content as well, and that's worked to uh, different degrees. But
Hmm.
in general, yeah, if you can rank well for a commonly asked question, then you're really going to bring in people.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like you guys have done a good job. You've done your collaborations, and you were asking me about domain rating and stuff like that before we start recording. So I feel like you guys are going about it like a very smart way. So if you don't mind me asking, like, how big is the podcast? Like, how many like monthly visitors do you get? Subscribers?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as you know, we can't really see the subscriber count for the podcast so much, but we have we use Buzzsprout. We're huge fans of that platform for getting the podcast out there. They tell us that our audience there is over 4,000. So on any given episode, we can expect on getting at least 4,000 downloads. Honestly, it's not the best platform for going viral because there's no algorithm really pushing your content out. It's just if people subscribe, they're getting the notification, and that's that. So you have to kind of approach it from a different angle to market that sort of thing. But with the podcast, it's grown steadily over time. Collaborations definitely have helped. We are at almost 600,000 downloads for the podcast. And then
It's awesome.
I haven't looked at our YouTube stats for a while, but I think we're approaching 10 million views. So there's a big difference there.
Hmm.
Not even at our first million downloads on the podcast, but almost at 10 million views on YouTube, if we haven't passed it by this point. So yeah, it's good to have both, like I said, for different reasons to cater to kind of the same audience, but at different levels. You know, people are interested in visiting Spanish speaking countries or learning Spanish, and they're just starting out with the YouTube channel, and then kind of guiding them along towards getting more advanced, different resources they can use, um, guide them towards, our membership or one of our Spanish immersion retreats, which are fantastic experiences. Mine, I really enjoy hosting those in Mexico. And yeah, they're just two different platforms for different strategies, I guess, or what am I trying to say?
Levels.
Different levels for people
Yeah.
in their journey. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, Jim, maybe this would be a good time. I'd love to hear more about the podcast membership, what people could get with that, and then I'd also be curious to hear about the immersions and uh, how you do that, how you kind of um, bring that whole thing together.
Yeah. So the podcast membership is where we have our best materials to accompany each podcast episode to make sure people are getting the most out of every episode.
Yes, so for each episode, we also have a breakdown section, which is actually in English, but that is a separate audio where we take between 10 and 15 words or phrases or expressions and we break them down for you in English. We tell you what they mean, we tell you a little bit like extra information, right? We sometimes just
Hmm.
like to talk about like the general idea of the podcast because we know that not everyone understands everything that we say during the Spanish, the regular episodes. So we go a little bit more in depth with some of these important words and phrases. We also have a quiz at the end of like the material, which is going to help you realize how much of the conversation you understood. And it's also between 10 and 15 questions just to check your understanding of the episode. What else do we have there?
Well, the transcript for every
Mm-hmm.
single episode. So it's a
Those are
word.
cool.
Oh, yeah. We have interactive transcripts for every single episode of the podcast. So if you're at a point where some phrases just kind of run together. When you're just learning a language, this happens a lot, and you alluded to it when you're learning French, is you hear someone speaking, and maybe if you saw it written down, you would have understood exactly what they said. But
Mm.
they will say something so fast that maybe you think it's a new word, but it's actually just four small words
Yeah.
spoken together really quickly. So with our podcast membership, the transcripts are interactive. So it's almost like karaoke. You play the podcast episode and you see each word highlighted
Mm.
as the audio moves along. And you can actually click on any word you want and jump to that part of the podcast as well. So it's easy to go back and listen to a phrase over a few times. You can adjust the speed and it doesn't affect the interactive
Yeah.
aspect of the podcast. So if you want to listen at half speed or three-quarters speed, you'll still see each word in sync with the audio, which is a huge benefit for people who are learning.
Definitely. And so, what's up with the immersion? Is it in Mexico City? I thought I heard.
Yeah, we have different cities. The one that we have done the most is the one in Guanajuato City, which is one of our favorite cities in Mexico. It's located in central Mexico in the state of Guanajuato, and this city is just it's so beautiful. It's like there's so much culture and history there, lots of arts, and it's just a great place to immerse yourself in Mexican culture. We also have one experience in Guadalajara, in the state of Jalisco. We have one coming up in Oaxaca City, which we are really excited. It's going to be our first time doing that one this fall. And we also have one in Mexico City. So we have four locations at the moment.
Yep. Yeah, and they're really unforgettable experiences. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this immersion program is unlike any other we're aware of. So basically, we'll take a group of maximum 12 people, depending on the city. Sometimes it's 10 people, depending on our accommodations in each city. But every day there are classes, and you get a group class as well as individual classes are available, and also a class that's more tailored to your level. So you can think of it sort of like a trickle down. So you've got the whole group class, you have another class where it's broken up into two different sections, a little more tailored to each student's level, and then opportunities to have classes with each of the teachers individually. And every single day there's a theme. So for week one, we might be focusing on how to order food in Spanish one day, and so the
Hmm.
classes revolve around that concept. But then at the end of classes, we go out and we actually practice what we learned in class. And so it's very interactive in that not only are you learning Spanish, but you get to go out and practice what you learned right away in real world situations. And then also we have different tours where people get to learn about the history of the city we're in, try street food, try the typical food of the area, learn more about what makes that part of Mexico special. And that gives students a lot of exposure and confidence to be able to then go on and travel more comfortably throughout Mexico or other Spanish speaking countries, because this experience gives them the ability to go out and kind of um, have that assistance where they can always ask a question and make sure that they know what's going on. But by the end of the week, they're able to really navigate a Spanish speaking city with confidence. And we've had a number of students then go on and do just that. We've had a number of students, as soon as they leave, buy a ticket to come back to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a really great experience for anybody who's just not quite sure how comfortable they would feel visiting a Spanish-speaking country on their own, or a place that's outside of the resort, right, away
Mm-hmm.
from the general comforts for most travelers. Well, they'll go and they say, "Oh, okay, Puerto Vallarta. Everybody goes there. I'm going to be fine." They'll speak to me in
Yeah.
English in the restaurants. No, this is the cities we pick are the cities we pick because you'll be forced to learn Spanish. You'll be forced to use your Spanish.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jim, I did notice that it was four landlocked cities.
Yeah, yep. We don't pick Tulum for a reason.
No beach towns, too many
No.
gringos.
No, and not to say that there are none in Mexico where we couldn't host something like this. It just, I mean, look at Oaxaca. If you go to Oaxaca City, you're going to notice a big difference talking to the locals and going around town there compared to Puerto Escondido, right? There on the beach where tons of people from English speaking countries go. I mean, it's
Hmm.
international as well, but a lot of people will just speak to you in English as soon as they see you there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the type of situation we want to avoid, because it just makes
Hmm.
it too easy for
Yeah.
you to to not have to use your Spanish. And most of Mexico is like that. Is like where you go, you're going to have to speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
There are only a handful of cities where you would go, and a lot of people go on vacation to, where they just have so many tourists coming through that most of the people who are working there or living there speak English as well.
Or are
Because
not even Mexicans.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think it's just nice to have these trips and options available to us. I think it's good to do something productive when you travel. Learn a language. That's something that people should be doing. Instead of just randomly walking around visiting museums and not knowing what you're doing. Like have
Mhm.
be part of. something, be part of a community, go do an immersion program, level up,
Mhm.
get like a life changing skill.
Yeah.
It's definitely like an awesome little activity to do for a week or the extent of the boot camp.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're fun. I mean, like I always love to see this. Like I always love to compare day one with like day seven, because the first day everyone's shy. We're doing like our introductions, like, oh, I am this person, I'm from this town, and this is what I do. And everyone is just like, yes, they're excited, but we can see that they're a little shy. And by the end of the week, it's so different. We're like a little family, and we're all just like sharing like our inside jokes, and we have a WhatsApp group. We keep in touch and we send photos, and it's really cool, like the connections you make with people who are at your level, or people who are, like-minded people
Yeah.
who want the same things that you want, who are interested in similar things. It's really cool.
Yeah. We always attract the best people. I always feel like we're so lucky because everyone who joins us on the retreats is so laid back and so open minded. And it's just a great time, like Mai said.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can definitely see how like lifelong friendships could form
Hmm.
over something like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
It actually sounds not all that different than, what happens in Playa del Carmen or Vallarta. All the digital nomads get together, and
Yeah.
we're basically doing what people are doing in the language immersion trip.
Yeah.
Little timid at first, and then night number two,
Yeah.
you bust out the tequila and the karaoke, and everyone's having a good time.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why we do have like traditional Mexican drinks on day two.
Yep. Hmm.
But no, I speaking of Mexico, we'll kind of segue into maybe we could talk about like where you guys have lived in Puerto Rico and in Mexico. So I think you are Mexicana, but you
Hmm.
guys went to live in Puerto Rico. Would love to kind of hear the story there.
Yeah, so I am from the Pacific side of Mexico. I am from the state called Colima. It's one of the smallest states in the country. Not a lot of people go there.
Hmm.
But what do we have there? Tons of palm trees, tons of limes, and it's very tropical. After we met and we got married and all of that, we decided to move to the US so I could get residency. We started saving up some money to start this project, Spanish and Go. And after a few years, we were getting like the itch of moving somewhere else. We knew that if we wanted to continue with Spanish and Go, we had to be somewhere else. We couldn't create content in Minnesota because it's not very um, tropical enough.
No, it wouldn't feel authentic.
Because
Hmm.
like the half of the year is snowing and it's dark outside, and we never wanted to record our videos there. So we were looking at options. We were still going through my immigration. I had a permanent resident by then.
Yeah.
Yeah, permanent resident in the US, so I had to be in the US for at least half of the year. And we were looking at different options for where the citizenship process would be faster for me, and what were our options. We wanted a place that was that had a big Hispanic community. So we were thinking California, Miami, Texas, or Puerto Rico. When we learned that Puerto Rico is part of the US, which is something not a lot of people know, we found out that the process there for citizenship applications was a little bit faster than in some other states. Then we just went there to visit for like 3 weeks,
Hmm.
and then like a week after we came back to Minnesota, they got hit with the big hurricane. it was Maria, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, we started working towards moving there, and yeah, we moved there in 2019, I
Yeah,
think.
the beginning of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't apply for my citizenship right away, but we spent almost 3 years there,
Mm-hmm.
and about, was it a year and a half of living there into living in Puerto Rico, we applied for my citizenship, and we were blown away by how quickly we were able to go through that.
4 months, I think it took from the moment we submitted the application to the moment when I had like my naturalization ceremony and all of that.
Yeah, I mean that part was really fast, but
Yeah.
the whole getting to that point took a really long time. I mean, years passed before Mai was able to apply for citizenship
Mm-hmm.
after we got married. But we were finally able to get her citizenship. So now she's a dual citizen
Mhm.
of Mexico and the US.
Mm-hmm.
And our goal was always for both of us to become dual citizens, because then we would have maximum liberties in each other's countries to be able to do whatever we wanted in terms of buying property or traveling or living there without any sort of limitation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when we left Puerto Rico. I mean, just a few months after Mai got her citizenship, we left Puerto Rico, not just because she was a citizen then, but then we were able to finally uh, really kick off what we're doing with Spanish and Go to travel to every Spanish speaking country.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. I love how you heard about the hurricane and you just weren't deterred and continued making plans.
Well, we figured it was like the lightning never strikes twice in the same spot, right? We figured if there's a really bad hurricane right then, and then we moved there, then what are the chances that another really bad one was going to hit right away? So um,
Yeah.
we were
This is
right
like
about that.
this is like logic of someone in January in Minnesota.
Yeah,
Um
but
it's
hey,
like
we were right about the hurricane. We just weren't expecting the earthquakes,
Yeah.
Oh,
which
really?
yeah, they
That
hit us
thing
while we
too?
were there. Yeah, there were earthquakes while we were living there. Actually, we are on the, was it the 21st floor of a building?
Mm-hmm.
And my just, I don't know, a week or two before the earthquake hit, we were reading, oh,
Because
well,
everyone kept saying, "Oh, there are no earthquakes in Puerto Rico." Because where I come from, we have a volcano right there, so we get everything. We get like the storms in the summer. We get earthquakes and volcano eruptions. So I'm used to this kind of like natural disaster life. But yeah, we were in Puerto Rico. Everyone was like, "No, we never get earthquakes," but they
Hmm.
do.
yeah,
So, it sounds like you lived there like 2, 3 years. You probably got to know the place pretty well. Were you like, so I would love to just hear kind of, your quick little spiel on living in Puerto Rico, like as a
Hmm.
gringo. Were you in San Juan? And yeah, just give
Hmm.
us like the lowdown real quick.
well, first we moved to a more remote part of the island. We were in the southwest
Hmm.
area of Puerto Rico, Boquerón,
Hmm.
in the Cabo Rojo municipality. And it's really beautiful there. There's just not a lot of people. So there are a number of retirees
Hmm.
there, and we lived close to the beach. We had the best apartment we had ever lived in. Uh, we just lived in kind of like a gated community, which is generally not our thing. We like to, live surrounded by the locals, but it wasn't a very large community there, and we did get to go out and walk to the beach from where we lived. The nature in Puerto Rico is absolutely gorgeous,
Hmm.
but it was a little too isolated for us in that section of the island. A lot of Puerto Ricans, that's where they go on vacation in Puerto
Hmm.
Rico, is to the west coast, because they
Hmm.
have the best beaches in our opinion. And
And it's not all that touristy. I mean, the people from the island go there on vacation, but they don't see all that many like international tourists there.
yeah, I think Cabo Rojo is considered the island's tourist destination for Puerto Ricans.
Hmm.
So you don't see a lot of people from outside of Puerto Rico there. One, because it's hard to get to if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have a car. So you kind of have to rent a car if you're visiting Puerto Rico, or buy a car if you're living there,
Mm-hmm.
to get to different areas of the island, because the public transportation doesn't
Almost
go everywhere.
non-existent.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah. It's expensive and almost non-existent.
yeah. And so then we were feeling so isolated. We decided, well, we're just going to move to San Juan, uh, because, the airport is right there. And we were going to meet with all these other like nomads or like entrepreneurs. We were very excited
Mhm.
about that. But then COVID started,
Yep.
like right after we moved. And so we were in lockdown, and yeah.
But it's a beautiful island. My favorite thing about Puerto Rico is the people there are really nice. I mean, we met some uh, really friendly locals who reached out to us, mainly because of the YouTube channel. It seemed like all of our videos that we did there did surprisingly well, just because I think for the most part there's just not a lot of content about Puerto Rico,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and Puerto Ricans are very proud people. So anytime
Hmm.
someone's showing off their island, it's like, oh yeah, check this out. And I think they pass the videos around and stuff. But
Yeah, it was crazy. That's like the first time probably we got recognized on the streets, or
no, I don't think it was the first
no,
time, but it happened
a
a lot
lot.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a great place for entrepreneurs, because a lot of people move there. There's a lot of crypto people who are moving there
Hmm.
now, so they had different crypto meetups every week there, and there's a lot of restaurants in the city. It feels a lot like being when you're in San Juan. It feels a lot like being in a major city in
In
the
the
U.S.,
US.
except
Mhm.
people speak Spanish. So
Yeah.
um,
Or Spanglish.
yeah, right. So there are some benefits to that. I mean, if you're from the US and you move to Puerto Rico, you can travel there without a passport, right?
Hmm.
You can use your credit cards just as you would
Hmm.
in the rest of the US. Banking is a little different, but yeah, you can open up a bank account there. You don't have to, get any special kind of paperwork there, different than what you would need in the US, being a US citizen or resident. So there's a lot of benefits to living in Puerto Rico. One of the disadvantages for maybe people who are just looking for a cheaper place to live is that, in our opinion, Puerto Rico is not cheap. I'd say it's pretty comparable to maybe a city like Minneapolis, um, fairly similar to, yeah, my home state in terms of cost. So maybe if you're coming from New York, you would see Puerto Rico and think it's pretty cheap,
Hmm.
but I'd say it's comparable to like the Midwest
Mhm.
in the states. Definitely much more expensive than Mexico.
'Cause everything's imported.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
I th- I think the statistic is that Puerto Rico imports at least 80, if not 85% of what they consume.
Hmm.
And there's a huge tax on imports too because of the Jones Act. So it is surprisingly expensive for
Yeah.
things like food.
The Jones Act, I've heard about this. It's like there's some sort of rule where the ships have to like go to mainland US before
Hmm.
they can go to Puerto Rico, or I have no
Hmm.
idea what.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say
A lot
I
of
don't,
the things they eat come from the Dominican Republic, but they can't come like directly from the Dominican Republic, which is right there next to them. So the ship has to go to the US, and they have to take everything down, and then they have to put it all in on a US ship, and then bring everything back to the island, to Puerto Rico.
yeah. So instead of being able to go straight from the Dominican Republic to Puerto Rico, it's Dominican Republic to like Miami, switch ships, and then Puerto Rico. So imagine the extra cost to do that every single time you want to import something.
Crazy. Yeah, I do want to, be respectful of your guys' time, and I want to make sure we have a little bit of time to talk about Mexico because that's where you guys are based now. I feel like there's a lot of talk about. Um, Jim, I think it's funny you took a while to get your residency, man. You've been going in and out of
Yeah.
Mexico for how long now?
Yeah, well, I
since we
guess,
met.
yeah, the better part of a decade. But the thing is, it wasn't until recently that people started to worry about getting enough time
Mhm,
in the country.
mhm,
I've never gone into Mexico and not gotten 180 days.
mhm,
Every single time I've entered Mexico, they've put 180 days on my FMM card, and
Hmm.
that's even since they started cracking down. And mine, I have our theories about why that may be. I mean, we're married. We usually go through the citizens line when we're getting into the country, and I think they just see us together and think, oh, okay, well, she's Mexican,
mhm,
he might as well get 180 days. So it just wasn't an issue before. We're
mhm.
we're on the road so often, we travel a lot, and I've never really needed to like hurry up and get out of the country because my 180 days was almost up. So it just wasn't a priority for us.
And also because since I had US residency, we were always so afraid that the US was going to be like, oh, but we see that your husband is applying to be a resident in Mexico. So that means that you guys don't really intend to live here. So we're not going to
Mm,
give you residency anymore or
that's a good
something like
point.
that. Yeah.
One at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was our approach. And I think that's how I discovered your blog and then your podcast, because I was looking at options for me to get my residency. Since we run Spanish immersion retreats, I thought, oh no, with what's going on with immigration now, what happens if we're outside of the country, we're heading to Mexico for one of our retreats, and they only give me 10 days?
Hmm.
And we've heard about people getting 10 days and lately, since what, the end of the fall of 2020, that's when
Hmm.
it seems like
Yeah.
the Mexican immigration started cracking down on people coming in and just using the 180 days as a way to live in Mexico.
Hmm.
So I saw your article about Mexican residency. That's something I'd been thinking about for a while. That's when I ultimately reached out to you. But yeah, since we started talking via email, I went ahead and got my Mexican residency, and it was surprisingly easy.
Yeah. Yeah, it only took like 4 hours. We went to my hometown of Manzanillo, Colima,
Hmm.
and there, I mean, it's like a beach town, but it's not very touristy. So the immigration office is not as crowded as, let's say, the one in Cancun or the one in San Miguel de Allende.
Hmm.
So we knew it was going to be faster. We also called and asked how the process was there. And the lady there was very nice and helpful. She was like, oh, if you bring everything and you are one of the first few people here, you can have the card in like that same day. And we were like, okay, let's do that.
Yeah. So we had our immersion retreats in Guanajuato. I think the day after the second week ended, we took a bus to Manzanillo, and we had hardly slept because we, took the night bus to get there. Ended up getting at the immigration office like 10 minutes before they were going to open. They were ready to go. So there was no one in line. We told them what we were there for and went through the process, and we were done by 12:30 in the afternoon, and I
Hmm.
had my card in hand.
No lawyer.
Nothing. Yeah.
No lawyer. Did everything ourselves. But to be fair, there are a few steps I didn't have to jump through. A few hoops I didn't have to jump through, considering we're married.
Hmm.
If you're not married to a Mexican national, then you have to do things like prove that you make a certain amount of money, or you have a certain amount of money in investments over a certain period of time, and you have to have a lot more bank statements. That's not a requirement for people who are married to Mexican nationals. Although instead of getting the 1 year temporary residency, I requested 2 years. And had I not done that, they wouldn't have asked for this next uh, thing I'm going to tell you about here. So I requested 2 years instead of one. Usually, you'll just pay for 1 year for your temporary residency, and then you have to go back in, and they'll give you your. Was it
Hmm.
still your temporary? But or can you apply for your permanent after the second year?
I think you can apply for permanent. Yeah.
Okay. but you can have your temporary residency for up to 4 years. But after two, you can get, I thought it was you could get your permanent after two. Anyway, the goal for us is for us to both get our dual citizenship. So after 2 years with the temporary residency, I can then apply for the permanent, and then immediately after that apply for citizenship. So anyway, since I requested 2 years for the temporary residency to avoid having to go back in a year later, they asked for some financials, and we weren't expecting that. But they only wanted 3 months of bank statements, and they didn't even say how much we needed to be making. They just wanted to see that it seemed like enough
Yeah.
to get by in Mexico
Okay.
without me taking like a job in Mexico, I
Yeah.
suppose. And that was it. That was really the only snag, which really wasn't much of a snag. They just asked, "Hey, can you provide 3 months of bank statements?" And I just went to
The
the
little cyber cafe.
the coffee shop nearby to get
Great.
some copies printed.
Hmm. Yeah, I think when it comes to the bank statements one, I don't think that there seems to be any consensus around how that works. But sometimes they just ask for it, basically, so that they can feel more comfortable in their decision
Yeah.
to give the extra time to you. And so if anyone comes to them, like if their managers come to them, like, oh yeah,
Yes.
like why'd you give them so much time?
Yeah.
It's like, oh well, they had deposits, blah blah blah. So I
Yeah.
think it can help. So that's a good tip out there for people is it I've heard literally everything from 1 years, 2 years, 4 years. Um, so it really depends on the path that you're taking.
Yeah, yeah. I don't remember all of the details because I was really focused on my particular case, but we recorded a podcast episode about this process for me, and then I'm about to publish another article on our website explaining what it was like to go through this in English, because it was pretty easy. So if you're married to a Mexican national, this can be easy. If not, there's a few other steps uh, where you have to start and apply from outside of the country.
Hmm. Yeah, there's I'm how many people do you think right now, just in the past like 6 months, have done this? Because as you alluded to, it really only just started with the tightening of the restrictions, maybe in like October 2021 is when I started hearing about it, I would say. Um, and then everyone had the same reaction you guys did, and so now it's been, I'd say, basically like 6 full months since they've sort of changed the policy. Um, I I bet, like, I mean, I'd be curious what your perspective is because you must have so many anecdotes from students and things like that.
Yeah, well, I've definitely read a lot of people's experiences on expat groups in Facebook, and we definitely have a lot of experience with the students who have joined us on the immersion retreats. We have had people come down to visit us, friends of ours, and they've gotten just one more day than the
Hmm.
time they had planned to be in Mexico. You get into the country and they'll ask you how long do you plan to be here, and uh, in several cases, not just our friends, we've heard people getting just exactly the amount of time that they need, maybe a day extra.
Hmm.
And
No, for sure. I just had a buddy. It happened to him. He got 12 days or something. He wanted to stay longer, and so there was a a way where he paid probably like $500 US to sort of like get that changed.
oh
Like,
wow,
Wow.
yeah, and just
Yeah.
for just to like get like a normal sort of tourist visa.
Yeah.
Um,
yeah, yeah. So we've seen a lot of people get far fewer days than 180. It seems like in our experience, people who are older, maybe retirement age, they tend to get the 180 days still,
mhm.
which is interesting to me. I'm not sure why that is. I mean, I don't know. Mai's kind of shaking her head over
I'm just
here.
thinking about
N-
your mom. Like before all of this, she would get 180 days every time she visited us in Mexico. And this last time, I think she only got like a couple of days more than she was staying.
Really?
Yeah,
I don't remember seeing how many days she was given, but
yeah.
I'm thinking of people like, some of the people who are retirement age who have joined us on the immersion retreats. People who come to Mexico often, uh, they'll often still get 180 days. So I'm not sure. It just seems to be kind
mhm.
of at the
If you
the
ask
whim.
for it, that
Mhm.
Yeah.
they might give it to you. So if you don't mind me asking, what city do you guys live in now?
Well, we're officially nomadic now,
Hmm.
so we
Hey,
call we call Mexico our home base because we keep going back there. I mean, we're in Nicaragua right now. In a couple of weeks, we'll go back to Mexico for like 3 weeks, and then we're off to Ecuador. We're there for maybe 2 months, and then we'll probably head back to Mexico for our retreats, and then we'll go off to some other country. So we don't really have a particular city that we're based out of.
Hmm. But my mom is in Mexico, in Colima. So every time we go to Mexico, we try to go and visit her. But we spend a lot of time in Mexico City too.
Yeah, Mexico City, Guanajuato because of the retreats.
Yes.
We love Querétaro. Um, but yeah, I'd say the cities we spend the most time in Mexico are probably Colima, Guanajuato, and Mexico City.
Hmm.
that's awesome. Random question: How do you refer to someone from Manzanillo, like Manzanillense?
Yeah. Manzanillense. Yeah.
But the
That's
funnier
cool.
thing is, how do you refer to people from Colima? Because they've got a couple of funny demonyms.
So you can say Colimota or Colimensa.
Yeah, yeah, you see why it's funny.
No, that can't be right. That's the real one.
Colimota.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, for a female, right? Like colimote
Uh huh.
for a guy,
Uh huh.
or colimense for a guy, but it has like the mensa. It's like silly or like dumb.
Uh
So colimensa sounds bad. So don't call us colimensas to us girls from Colima. Colimota is better.
And then you can say, "Pásame la colimota."
I knew there was something there. I knew it was the non-standard one.
Yes.
And do you guys like Manzanillo? Is it like a cool city? Would you recommend it for digital nomads or expats? You're on the beach. It's pretty tropical.
Yeah, I don't know.
I heard the
It's
waves are pretty strong.
Yes, yes. There are a few towns that are very famous for like surfing there in the state of Colima, but I don't know. I guess the part of Manzanillo that is like the where the hotels and restaurants are is cool, but then we also have a big port. We have the biggest port, I think, in the Pacific of Mexico. So it tends to be, I don't know, you see all the containers and the ships, the big
Uh,
ones, and a lot of traffic. So, and it's hot and humid. Not a lot of people enjoy that type of heat. But the beaches are nice. I mean, it's my hometown. I was born there, so I'm a little biased, but I like it.
And it's also more affordable than some of
Yes.
the other more
mm-hmm,
popular beach towns,
Mm-hmm.
right?
mm-hmm.
So it's got that going for it. I
Yeah.
mean, Colima has been considered one of the most dangerous states in Mexico for a long time, so that deters some people. In our experience, we've never seen any violence happening. That doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
it's not happening because it most certainly is.
Yeah.
But I think in general, it's away from areas where tourists go, or
Yeah.
if you're not involved in the drug trade, you're probably not going to run into that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a cool state. I mean, I think it's cool to think about, what are the beach towns on the Pacific side of Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of giving people the whole range of options so they know everything from Mazatlan to
Yeah.
Sayulita to Vallarta to
Yeah.
Manzanillo to
Yeah.
Acapulco. Uh,
Michoacan is just, it's so beautiful. The beaches there are gorgeous, but again, not a lot of people visit because because of the news, right? Like the things that happen there with like the narcos and like the war on drugs. Yeah, it can be a little bit risky, but yeah, it's beautiful there.
on Twitter lately, anytime someone responds like, "Is it dangerous there?" like all the like Twitter Latin bros, they just pile in like, "It's dangerous, stay away," like wink, wink,
Yeah.
and we're kind of like trying to like keep all the gringos out by like using this like perception of danger so we can
Yeah.
keep the good beach towns to ourselves.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good strategy. I mean, it filters out the people who are on edge about different parts of Mexico. It's like, well, yeah, if you're afraid of getting out and being around locals, it's like
Hmm.
that's where you see a lot of people just going to the gringo enclaves where
Hmm.
they feel like they'll be safe because they can get by with just speaking English and
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. And then I guess one or two more Colima things.
Hmm.
Um, there is a town near the capital of Colima. Is it Comala or one of the other ones? It's like a Pueblo Mexico where there
Hmm.
actually is a bit of a presence of expats and stuff.
Well, Comala is the only pueblo mágico in the state of Colima. That's actually the town where my mom lives.
Hmm.
We moved there, I think, in 2016. Like my mom, my sister, and me when we were about to go to college, and it's
2006.
2006.
I
Yes, yes.
was gonna say, I think you've been there
Succeed.
longer than that.
Yes, yes, 2006. And yeah, it's a small town. I mean, everyone knows each other there. It's like as soon as you like as soon as something happens there, everyone knows about it, right? It's that little town
Hmm.
life where you can see your neighbors sitting like with their chair and their drinks outside of their house, just like watching uh, people go by and greeting each other even if you don't know them. We like it there. It's very tranquilo.
Yeah,
um,
Hmm.
it's very chill.
yeah, maybe too chill for some people. We haven't seen like a lot of expats there. I know for sure maybe like a German lady who lives there, and like the gringo family who spends like a few months out of each year there.
Mai's basically saying you can count the gringos on one
Yes,
hand
yes.
in Komala because when I'm there, uh, especially the first few times I went there,
Hmm.
I could feel people watching me. You know, it's like there's so few gringos that it's a rarity to see a white guy walking down the street.
I mean,
So
and we would we would go out for like just to exercise. We would run, and he was running outside without a shirt, and that's like not very common in Mexico, right? Not very common in Latin
Hmm.
countries where people
Hmm.
are just like topless. Well, guys, right? And so he was. People were like, "What's this gringo without a shirt doing, running around the park here?"
yeah, I joked I was the gringo encuadrado, the naked
Yeah,
gringo walking around town.
yeah.
No, I think that's a rite of passage because we don't realize it that a culture that's all about reggaeton and all that stuff, and then you can't even you kind of even if you're like walking on the boardwalk along the beach, it's like weird to not wear a shirt.
Uh
Yeah,
huh.
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean in Comala it's banda music. So everyone there, especially guys, are wearing
Mhm.
their jeans and their button shirt, and it's hot outside and it's sunny, but they're wearing jeans and like a long sleeve shirt.
And so Comala is the only Pueblo Mágico in
Hmm.
Colima.
Hmm.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
But the
Okay,
city
yeah.
of Colima, I could see that being a pretty good hub for expats or people who are working online
Yeah.
because the internet is really fast there. It's a hot city, but you've got all of the main
Hmm.
conveniences that you might be looking for, right? They've got
And you're only like 30 minutes away from a beach. You are like an hour and a half or an hour away from the mountain there, the volcano. You have all like the big stores there. We have like the Sam's Club and the Walmarts and all of like the restaurants too.
Low cost of living.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Have you gone up the volcano?
Yes.
Yeah, I've come really close to reaching the summit, not all the way yet. Uh, I think it's one of those things where, depending on how used to climbing mountains you are,
The
you
elevation.
might want to stay a night at a lower elevation,
Hmm.
because it does get up to 14,000 feet, over 14,000 feet at the
Hmm.
summit.
Hmm.
And so I've been very, very close to the top, but my lips turned blue last time. And so I decided to go back. But
Yeah.
it's definitely one of the best things to do in the area, in my opinion. If you're into, adventure and you want to get out into nature,
Hmm.
the volcanoes there are impressive.
I actually had one question about that. So there's the Nevado de Colima, and then there's the
Mhm.
Volcan de Colima. So there's like two different peaks.
Yes. So we have El Nevado de Colima is the tallest one. That's an extinct volcano.
Hmm.
So it's so tall that during the first few rains of the year, it gets covered in like snow or ice. So that one looks white. And then we have the right next to it another volcano formed, which is El Volcán de Fuego, and people say that because the volcán de nieve got what like not dried up but like it closed up because it was dormant for so many years that
Hmm.
the lava had to find another way out, so it created this second cone, and that one is active, the volcán de fuego. So like the fire volcano is the one that you can see when you go hiking up the volcán de nieve. So we have like the snow and the fire volcanoes.
It's so funny.
Really?
I'm just looking at it right now, and it's like two peaks,
Uh-huh.
and it's only two peaks, and they're
Hmm.
just right beside each other. It's very striking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and the best views are from Comala, from the Pueblo Mágico. There you get the best views of like the two mountains together.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's yeah, definitely a good little itinerary for people between visiting the capital, Comala, doing a little hike
Yeah.
of the mountains, maybe heading down to Manzanillo as well. Get the
Yes.
Colima World Tour.
Yeah.
Yeah, the coffee plantations on the volcano too. There's a lot of organic coffee grown there because of like the ashes of the volcano. The soil there is very fertile. They grow a lot of avocados there too. So yeah, there's a lot of nature there.
That's awesome, guys. Well, thank you for allowing me to, nerd out about Colima for a couple of minutes there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a place, like Mike said, not a lot of people go there. It's not really on the map for a lot of expats, and yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for Colima. It's a beautiful state.
Hmm.
Definitely. So we can get to start wrapping up. Yeah, anything else that you wanted to ask me about or make sure that we covered in this episode? I know we bounced around a little bit.
Well, yeah, we invite anybody who's learning Spanish and wanting to up their confidence and their fluency and just their comfort level communicating with different Spanish speakers in Mexico, the locals. There's a lot of good reasons to do so. I mean, if you're already thinking about it, you can probably list a number of reasons why it would make your life a lot easier. But you'll just be able to have a much more enriching experience being able to speak Spanish in Mexico, and we're happy to help you out if you're interested in doing so, either through our video resources or the podcast membership, or even an immersion retreat. We'd love to have you.
Hmm. Yeah, random thought, but it's I wonder what the US and Mexico will look like in like 100 years time, where the countries are just going to be so much more integrated than they used to be, where the US is getting more and more latinizado, more
Mm-hmm.
latinized,
Mm-hmm.
and Mexico is just obviously gonna have more and more gringos pour in. It's just a no-brainer. Lower your cost of living, people retiring,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So like the macro trends are very much in favor of the US getting more Latin and Mexico getting more American. I mean, and you guys are kind of a living example of it.
Yeah, well, globalization is bringing us all closer together, and the internet makes mixing cultures so much easier. And it's always funny to me to hear which words become part of Spanish vocabulary, right? Like words
Mm-hmm.
like cool, or a lot of technological words
Mm-hmm.
like computer and mouse and keyboard. A lot of things end up being passed over to Spanish. And it'll be interesting to see how things evolve, like you say, over the years, as we become more and more connected, and it becomes easier and easier to travel around and experience different parts of the world. How that'll continue to evolve.
Yeah, I just hope Mexico can keep doing what we're doing, trying to keep the culture alive, right? Like we're very proud of like Mexican food, and we are very proud of our music and our traditions. And I just hope that people coming to Mexico adapt to the way of living in Mexico and learn the language and try to integrate with the culture, and try to learn from it too, and try not to change it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I definitely don't want the food of Mexico to change. Like I say,
Yeah.
Hmm.
things will evolve over time. But if Mexican food becomes more and more Tex-Mex, I'm not going to be too happy about that.
I don't want to live in that world.
Yeah.
Mexico is just such a huge country. It's insane. And it's
Yeah.
so culturally diverse. And for, a gringo coming into it, you actually don't know what you're getting yourself into and how much
Hmm.
culture you're about to have to learn because
Yeah.
there's 32 states. They're all of different cultures. They're famous for different things. They have
Hmm.
different vibes. They could basically, like, a lot of them could survive as independent countries. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, random thought, but like, Jim, like one of the things I've been going to like more like Mexican weddings recently. Maybe you've probably been to a few, and I think one of the biggest cultural differences is, the kids, they're like dancing with the parents, and then they go and the parents will like keep partying after the kids go to bed, and the kids are just like sleeping like on the
On the
dance floor
chairs.
on a
Yeah.
chair.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, there's like a meme, like un niño durmiendo entre dos sillas.
Uh-huh.
Um,
I
it's
think
like
I've
a
seen it. Yeah.
just like a kid, like a little kid like sleeping with like a huge speaker, like blasting banda
Yes.
music in his ear, and
Yeah. No, kids aren't nearly as sheltered in Mexico as they are in the US.
I love it. I love it. I honestly feel like I probably should give my kids this experience in some way because they'll just learn to be so much more like street smart and everything. And I don't know. It's more. It feels to me more like how things used to be back in the day.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, Mexico is definitely a lot more traditional, and I think it definitely has its benefits. I mean, one thing that stands out to me is kind of the lack of regard for safety, right? In the US, we have safety rails on everything, and everything's painted yellow, or
Yeah.
like some fluorescent color, so it stands out. Like, watch your step.
Or
They've got
everything has like, yeah, like even the food, right? Like for example, Dia de Reyes not just in Mexico, but in Latin American countries or Hispanic countries where they celebrate Dia de Reyes, they have this sweet bread, and they have little plastic figures inside of the bread, and you cut your piece, and then you eat it, and then you find out if you have the little plastic baby Jesus inside.
Hmm.
that wouldn't happen in the US, right? Like they would be like, warning, not for children under 10 or something.
Yeah. Well, I think they even banned the Kinder Surprise in the U.S. because it's a choking hazard, right? You're
Really?
putting
Yeah.
something that's non-edible inside of,
The edible. Yeah.
yeah, a candy for kids. So in the U.S., that's considered, just a lawsuit waiting to happen. But in Mexico, it's everyday life.
Yeah.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. I just learned about that holiday just this past, Christmas season, and
Hmm.
we did our first Dia de los Reyes cake, and got to explain to my family this whole,
Yeah.
pieces of plastic in the
Uh-huh.
cake, and the only way to find out is to like bite in and see if there's plastic.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Uh,
And another one, I'll just vent for a sec. I mean, we want to get a new door for my house in Canada, my family's house. And
mhm.
it can't just be a door, it has to be like a fireproof safety door. And it's going to be like over
Right.
$5,000 for a door. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Wow.
I need, I just wish we were in Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's far fewer regulations for practically anything, it seems, in Mexico.
Or more freedom is maybe a better way to look at it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could go on about freedom, but no, Jim and Maya, thank you so much for joining me on an episode of the My Latin Life podcast. It was a pleasure to collaborate with you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
It's been a pleasure.
Awesome, and yeah, hope to collaborate together in the future. Hope to recommend to people to take your boot camps in Mexico and to listen to your podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite. And anybody looking to find us, you can find us at SpanishandGo.com. Everything's right there.